Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Decent Meal, Building Empathy in a Divided America by Michael Carolan, narrated by Patrick Lawlor. Chapter 1. Journeys to the Heartland. This book's origin story involves strawberries, what I've come to call the strawberry study. A dozen individuals were recruited from middle-class and higher economic backgrounds from northern Colorado. The stated purpose of this exploratory study was to better understand what information participants absorbed about strawberry production, from facts to feelings, and whether this knowledge had any effect on their attitudes about industrial strawberries and the invisible labor that supplies eaters with this delicate fruit. I was especially interested in whether these outcomes varied depending on the knowledge delivery method. Participants were first told about the processes and people involved through handouts and a documentary about immigrant strawberry laborers. Later, they experienced it by picking. They were also asked to use their phones to take photos while in the field. The images were the biggest surprise, lending unexpected empirical weight to the qualitative interview data. They changed substantially over the course of the day. Morning frames were remarkable in their repetitive sameness, landscape shots broken up with the occasional arm's-length selfie. Yet by afternoon, with the sun hot overhead, the images told a different story. Selfies were closer, suggesting that the focal point was not the face, but the exhaustion. Sweaty faces and wet, matted heads of hair, upturned baseball caps showing sweat-drenched bills, a pair of soil-stained bare knees, a half-dozen pictures of trays held by fingers caked with dirt. By day's end, everyone had taken photos that not only documented their physical exertion, but accentuated it. A week later, after bodies had had time to heal and minds the opportunity to reflect, I met with each participant. What I heard verified what the photos had shown me. One individual, Nick, had commented at the beginning of the study that illegal aliens are stealing our jobs. A bleeding-heart liberal is not a term that has ever been applied to Nick. Certainly he would not see himself as one. Thank Christ, I'm sure he would add. He affiliates with a political tribe that watches Fox News religiously, primetime Fox specifically. Yet by the study's end, Nick's tone toward immigrants had changed. Asked to reflect on his time in the field picking, he said, "Yeah, that probably isn't a job many Americans would want." He then took a long breath and exhaled. The air rushed between his teeth and made a whistling sound, buying him time to think, either about the actual answer or about the one he wanted to give. Maybe we do need immigrants for some things. Maybe I can be too harsh. Granted, Nick's growth as an empathetic individual toward this group is far from complete. After all, immigrants are here for much more than just manual labor. But if this pivot represents the beginning of something more, then I welcome it. What is remarkable about Nick's response is not so much the content of his words, but what they represent, and what that might imply about society on a much larger scale. Nick lacked empathy for agricultural workers, especially foreign-born ones, and this experience created a space within him for it. Empathy, I've found, starts not by changing minds, but by changing our opinions of others. As for how those opinions get changed, you might be surprised by what I found. Palms turned up and raised off the table, Nick's apologetic repose was not unique to the group. Many described similar attitudinal shifts after exposure to that field work. And they did this without ever meeting a single immigrant laborer. I am not saying the experiment changed their political loyalties, that it somehow changed their cognitive filters. By study's end, they remained motivated partisans, just a little less so when it came to issues of immigration and immigrant labor. I was reluctant to draw too many conclusions from this study. It was exploratory, after all. Without getting very specific, something had happened to those participants. Wanting to learn more, I set out from there. We all have a Dwayne story. His skills as an arborist were put to work on a blustery winter day in 2017. Surrounded by peach trees and a couple dozen men from Mexico, Dwayne pruned as I chatted with one of the farm's owners. It was mid-February. We were at a fruit orchard in western Colorado. Dwayne was providing research assistance. His Spanish was better than mine. We were investigating how federal immigration policies had impacted the state's fruit farms, a project that included interviewing some of those workers for whom the United States is a foreign land. Though it was early afternoon, the winter sun hung low in the horizon. The skeletal trees looked as though they were decorated with flickering lights. Such was the effect when the pruner's lopping shears caught the midday rays and glinted brightly. Dwayne looked remarkably at ease, not just with the shears, but with those he was working alongside. He had teamed up with another gentleman. Standing shoulder to shoulder, the exhaust of their breath in the cold air mixed between their almost touching baseball cap bills. Even at 100 yards, I could make out bits of Spanish. Aquí, más bajo, está bien. The cold air and gentle breeze proved an especially good conduit for their laughter. It registered as if they were standing directly in front of me. The next day, Dwayne was behind the wheel, driving an underpowered four-cylinder Ford Ranger over the 7,834-foot Raton Pass on the Colorado-New Mexico border. I was seated at the other end of the tattered bench seat. We were leaving the state to continue the research that had taken us to that western Colorado fruit farm. It was then that he shared with me some of his biography, which put into context the interaction that I just described. Before attending college, Dwayne had been a hired hand on a farm. Best friends with the son of a large-scale fruit and vegetable grower in Washington state, Dwayne had been put on the payroll by the farmer as a favor to his son, those skills as an arborist the result of on-the-job training. Dwayne eventually proved his worth as a gearhead. He was a prodigy when it came to small engine repair. Physically, Dwayne was a pretty nondescript guy. Being of what I consider average height and weight, about 5 feet 9 inches and 180 pounds, his brown hair had that just-got-out-of-bed look without appearing disheveled. This averageness stood in sharp contrast to his voice. He sounded like the baritone in a barbershop quartet. Reflecting on his recent experience pruning, he remarked, "Seeing those immigrants, that brought back memories." He admitted to being a little racist as a teen. I'm not sure that particular noun can be modified, but those were the words he used. Those sentiments extended to non-English-speaking immigrants. "I can't tell you how many times I got in trouble for arguing with my high school Spanish teacher," he confessed, adding, "I didn't need to learn another language, I thought. Immigrants should have been the ones learning a new language, English." Events from that day working alongside Mateo, the other half of the aforementioned pruning team, stirred something within my 30-year-old white middle-class companion. Self-reflection. "I'm not that person anymore," he intoned. "My parents would tell me repeatedly that I was wrong, and show me data in some cases which would refute my ignorance, like how I thought immigrants don't pay taxes, or that they committed crimes at higher rates than other groups." "What changed?" I asked. Dwayne scratched the top of his head with the hand that had been resting on the manual stick shift before answering. "Farm work is all about getting into a rhythm. Focusing on the task at hand lends itself to forgetting who you're working alongside. You begin treating them and they you like a human being." He glanced in my direction. "I guess my attitudes about immigrants changed after I got to experience them as fellow humans, during those moments when the baggage of our social and political allegiances is not so immediate." Dwayne's parents repeatedly told him that his biases were unfounded and presented him with facts to support their position. Yet it took being put into a situation where he got to know this group as fellow humans. This stands in contrast to what usually happens when confronting someone different, an almost reflexive need to assign people into political, Republican, Democrat, national, immigrant, etc., and value-laden, for example, friend, enemy categories. The farm work was disarming in that sense, a point he described in terms of it affording a rhythm. The migrants he got to know while tinkering with engines did not have brown skin, but bodies that bled red and that hugged and held family members, just as Dwayne did, bodies that faced threats instead of representing them. You probably know someone like this, someone who viewed a group through a narrow lens until, thanks to a series of transformational experiences, a lot more became visible. This book describes individuals like this, people who underwent a transformation. But rather than the result of happenstance, the experiences described were intentional, like in the strawberry study. You will be introduced to people who started at one place, entered into a meaningful experience, and came out with a more encompassing and empathetic view of others. The conclusion I keep coming back to is that facts alone cannot heal today's caustic political environment. We therefore need to rethink what I call the headland model of social change. A body of land battered by waves of factual information is not impervious to change, but most of these alterations are matters measured in degrees, inches lost to erosion and the like. Changes of kind, of substance, are rare. Headlands do not change by nature of their experiences as headlands. A decent meal gives voice to what we learn that cannot be easily reduced to words or statistics, the experience itself, the heartland. The project described is about amending the soil of our existence, crafting encounters and experiences that afford new ways of living, feeling, and knowing. My use of the term heartland is not meant as a geographic reference. In addition to the title of a popular Canadian drama series available on Netflix, the heartland is commonly associated in the U.S. with the Midwest. Instead, the metaphor helps me describe a fissure in how Western thought has traditionally broken down experience. One way focuses on the head, cognition, and reason. The other, what I am calling the heartland, is a catch-all for everything else, where you find such phenomena as emotion, embodiment, and affect. Not that heart and head are actually separate, but we'll get to that later. This book is testament to why the heartland matters, and more than that, how it just might be key to saving modern democracies. The Headland Model, Faith Misplaced. My experiences as an educator have been sobering. It has not reached the level of an existential crisis, but it is close. Etymologically, a professor is someone who professes to make declarations that, I used to think, advanced the human condition, or at least got people to reevaluate attitudes and behaviors. How foolish to think that telling people facts will elicit changes in how they think and act. Long gone are the starry-eyed days of thinking that minds and actions of the next generation can be fundamentally changed by my fact-based lectures. What data will change the mind of a bigot or a xenophobe? If you think Donald Trump supporters are a basket of deplorables, what could I possibly tell you to make you feel otherwise? Part of the problem with the Headland model is that it overlooks the overwhelming empirical evidence concerning how cultural and political beliefs filter the facts we choose to see and acknowledge. Traditional liberal political theories continue to advance the idea that good old-fashioned, well-reasoned talk holds the potential to solve any social ill. How can that be if we hear only what we want? We have a term for this: motivated reasoning. Rather than using facts to objectively arrive at a political decision, or any decision really, this framework argues that we rationalize our way into the decisions we originally wanted to make. This occurs thanks to both confirmation bias, a tendency to look only for information we agree with, and disconfirmation bias, which involves systematically dismissing information that we disagree with. These biases are also especially strongly correlated with partisanship. This explains the tendency to reduce debates to being about the left versus the right, whether talking about climate change, COVID-19, mask wearing, or whether Black Lives Matter. The more we identify with a political party, the more we work to find ways to have our beliefs confirmed. In 2018, Bell County High School student and valedictorian Ben Bowling gave the commencement speech. Nearly 80% of the county, located in southern Kentucky, voted for Trump in the 2016 presidential election. This is the part of my speech where I share some inspirational quotes I found on Google. Bowling is reported as saying, "Don't just get involved. Fight for your seat at the table. Better yet, fight for a seat at the head of the table." Donald J. Trump. The crowd erupted in applause. Before the commotion had a chance to subside, Bowling cut in. "Just kidding," he said, adding, "That was Barack Obama." According to the 18-year-old, the crowd quickly went quiet. The headland model for understanding attitudes and behaviors would have you believe facts speak to us like numbers in an equation, where 4 plus 4 is to 8, like exposure to similar information is to consensus. That is not the scenario described by young Mr. Bowling. The audience did not judge the merits of the quote by the principles it espoused, but by who allegedly said it. I am not saying facts no longer matter, though that would make for a fitting refrain in this so-called age of alternative facts. Facts are important, just not in the way they are conventionally portrayed by the headland model. In one study, authors analyzed climate change survey data from 3 populations: the U.S. public, scientists actively publishing on energy technologies, and congressional policy advisors. Its findings uncovered evidence that the ideological divide about global warming gets significantly larger according to respondents' knowledge about politics, energy, and science. More knowledge, in other words, was shown to increase the divide between climate change skeptics and those believing it to be real and human-induced. Strategies forward need to be informed by these realizations. You will hear about experiences that touched participants so deeply that some of those cognitive filters changed. But I show how, in other instances, partisan-motivated reasoning was leveraged to enroll participation of the very individuals you would expect to be least interested in fostering empathy toward historically marginal groups. Yet once enrolled, these hard-headed individuals reported a change of heart. Some experiments described even provide clues about when facts are most likely to matter, but only after individuals were primed by heartland encounters. The heartland model: closing distances. Let us not forget that people in opposing political groups generally do not like each other. And if federal hate crime statistics are any indication, the Bureau of Justice Statistics reports roughly 250,000 annually. Many in these groups hate one another. If you hate or even mildly dislike those who do not share your social and political affiliations, what are our options to moderate those biases and filters in the hope of providing a fighting chance for healing? I propose that our search for possibilities can be aided by the idea of proximity. When groups live physically, socially, and emotionally separate lives, they are far less likely to empathize with each other. In this environment, stereotypes rule the day. Take society's evolving attitudes toward LGBTQ communities. More than 2/3 of U.S. adults think gay marriage should be legally recognized. Back in 1996, that figure was 27%. One thing that has been particularly helpful in moving the attitudinal needle: the reduction of social, emotional, and geographic distance. Nearly 9 in 10 U.S. adults now say they know and regularly interact with someone who is gay or lesbian. We have all heard stories of religiously conservative politicians undergoing a change of heart after the coming out of a loved one. That empathy can overpower religious dogma speaks volumes to its political potential. I am not talking about geographic proximity. The proximity we need to mitigate against hate cannot just be measured in inches or feet. Something else has to happen too, as evidenced by recent demographic happenings, where diverse groups, whether they like it or not, are finding themselves living, working, studying, worshiping, and shopping within the same zip code, if not closer. There was a strong correlation between support for Trump throughout his presidency and a community's growing Latino population. White Democrats who previously backed Obama were among those included in Trump's base. This aligns with other research detecting a positive relationship between recent Hispanic immigration and state-level variation in anti-Hispanic hate crimes. Is this that kumbaya moment we think results from bringing different people physically together without attention to how these groups feel about each other? This physical closeness might instead be correlated with white nationalism and xenophobia. This is where strategies to reduce social and emotional distances come into the picture. Approaches that promote connecting with others on affective, I can feel his pain, and social, she's not so different from me, levels. My reference to the heartland is to nudge our focus beyond the unsubstantiated belief that facts alone will bring us together. Being told you're wrong and why. When does that ever work? Total eclipse of the heart. As I work to identify what those heartland phenomena are, let me start by highlighting a distinction made by social psychologists and political scientists between values and attitudes. The former refers to the deep beliefs we all have about how the world is and ought to be, whereas the latter speaks to what we think about particular worldly aspects. Values are incredibly sticky, hard to change. Values help explain what gets filtered, while attitudes are among those outlooks that emerge from the process. A series of experiments has shown that tailoring advocacy to a person's values can shift attitudes toward a policy. In one study involving self-identified liberals and conservatives, the latter's attitudes shifted dramatically in the pro-environmental direction after exposure to what the authors called a binding moral frame, where protecting the environment was portrayed as a matter of obeying authority, defending nature's purity, and advancing American patriotism. This exposure included having participants read statements like, "Show you love your country by joining the fight to protect the purity of America's natural environment," which spoke to conservatives' values more than the frames directed at, say, righting environmental injustices. This pro-environmental shift in attitudes was especially apparent when the binding message was perceived as coming from an in-group. The power of in-group identification. Sound familiar? It should. Value-motivated cognition is not a reasoning deficiency, but a reasoning adaptation directed at promoting the interest that individuals have in wanting to be part of a larger group. While interesting, this literature leaves me unsatisfied. Where do these deeper values come from, and how might they be changed? I am also not convinced that the solution to our current incivility and hate, the dissolution or ripping of the American fabric into factions, is better messaging. It feels like a superficial and insincere response, considering the level of healing needed. All of this brings me back to the origins of this book. This dissatisfaction, coupled with a few pivotal observations about proximity, germinated into an idea, which led to one exploratory study after another until, well, now I have a book's worth of data. I suggest looking for solutions in actions rather than in solely the transmission of facts, which entails reevaluating the value of what we do and with whom. The conclusions add an important twist to how we think about how people perceive and respond to the world around them. Why food? We all eat. No matter your political allegiances, spiritual beliefs, legal residency status, gender identity, or sexual orientation, food is your intimate. And like the other intimates in your life, there is a desire to know it well, intimately. Recently, I spent an entire weekend trying to learn how to make kolaches. There's something you have to do over and over again if you want to know it well. Our individual cultural heritage, what our ancestors did, is arguably connected with numerous activities: sewing, knitting, soap and candle making, tanning hides, gunsmithing. Yet food-related practices hold a special place in our hearts, as evidenced by the growing interest in heritage food. This includes not wanting a family recipe to die with one's grandparents, as in my case with kolaches. Grandma also knew how to make buttons from clamshells caught in local rivers. No one bothered to learn that aspect of my family's heritage. That knowledge died with her, even though the Heritage Crafts Association included button making as one of its endangered crafts. We might not know a lot about matters relating to food. We've all read statistics revealing the belief among some eaters that, for instance, milk comes from wheat. But at least we are curious. While more than 70% of Americans say they know nothing or very little about farming or ranching, more than half report taking steps over the last year to learn more about where their food comes from. Perhaps that curiosity links to wanting to live a more environmentally sustainable lifestyle. A 2018 survey of 1,009 Americans ages 18 to 80 found that 60% of participants considered it important that the food they purchase or consume is produced in a sustainable manner. This helps explain why the late 20th century food from nowhere regime is undergoing a transformation, as evidenced by enormous investments in the tracking and tracing of food for purposes of food safety. Not to mention how this helps food firms minimize the potential for bad publicity, liability, and recalls. Or take the growing interest in cooking, especially post-pandemic. One pre-COVID survey found that more than 90% of U.S. shoppers watch cooking shows. More recently, a survey of more than 1,000 American adults conducted in early April 2020 had over half report cooking more, 54%, and almost as many said they were baking more, 46%, than before the pandemic, a finding supported by some of my own research. Our inquisitiveness toward food seems to know no bounds, as the following chapters detail. Food is not a red American or blue American issue, just as it is not something that interests only the rich or poor. Household income may mediate what people eat, yet wealth has nothing to do with one's dependence on a wonderment of food systems. What if that inquisitive appetite could be used to engender something culturally healing in addition to more informed eaters? Coming to tables and more. We know from countless experiments that communication breaks down almost immediately when people with contrasting lived experiences are unwillingly brought together to hash out differences. There is a reason why most families abide by the no talk of politics or religion at the dinner table rule. It's a conversation killer. But what if we changed the expressed purpose of the encounter? What happens when we are brought together not just to get along, but also to learn more about our food systems? With that amendment, our response to others in the same space changes, often dramatically, as I illustrate through a variety of novel experiments. This is not, however, one of those come-to-the-table books. Commensality has been a long-studied and discussed topic in the food studies tradition. Another book on the topic would struggle to express anything that has not been written before. Besides, this book is really about what precedes those encounters. I am all for people eating together, but what about those who hate each other?
Sample complete. Ready to continue?